Good morning. Today is Saturday and our Gita class, chapter by chapter. So today we are going to go through chapter number 10, Vibhuti Yog. But before that, let's do some mantras also. Om Parthaye Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayan Swayam Vyasena Grathitam Puran Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Ritvarshini Bhagavati Mashtadashadhyayani Amb Tvam Anusandhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavtveshane Namo Astute Vyas Vishal Buddhe Full Arvind Ayat Patra Netar येन तव्या भारत तैल पूर्णा प्रज्वलितो ज्ञान में प्रतिभा प्रपन्न पारी जाताये तोत्र वेत्र एक पाने ज्ञान मुद्राये कृष्णाये गीता अमृदुहे नमः सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोगदा गोपाल नंदना पार्थो वत्सा सुधीर भोगता दुग्धम गीता अमृतम महत वसुदेव वसुतम देवम कंस चानूर मर्दनम देवकी परमानंदम कृष्णं वंदे जगद्गुरुं भीष्म द्रोण तटा जयद्रथ चला गांधार नीलोत्पला शल्य ग्रावती कृपेन वहनी कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थाम विकर्ण घोरमकरा दुर्योधन अवर्तनी सोतीर्णा खलु पांडवैरनदी कवर्तका केशवा पाराशरे वत्सरोजमलम गीता अर्थगंधोटकम नानाख्यानक केसरम हरि कथा संबोधन अबोधितम लोके सज्जन षटपदय रह पेपिये मानम मुधा भूयाद भारत पंकजम कलिमल पर ध्वंसी न श्रेयसे मूकम करोति वाचालम पंगुम लंघ्यते गिरिम यत् कृपातमं वंदे परमानंद माधवम यम ब्रह्म वरुण इंद्र रुद्र मरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यस्तवे वेदै सांग पद क्रम उपनिषदै गायन्ति यम सामका ध्यान अवस्थित तद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यम योगिनो यस्य अंतम न विदुसुर असुर गना देवाये तस्मै नमः. So last week we finished chapter 9 and I told you that is like a half of the Bhagavad Gita. Total chapters are 18 now. If you remember, the Gita started with the Vishad Yoga, then Sankhya Yoga, then Karam Yoga, Gyan Karam Sannyas Yoga, Karam Sannyas Yoga, Atam Sanyam Yoga, Gyan Vigyan Yoga, Akshar Brahm Yoga, Raj Vidya, Raj Guh Yoga. So now this chapter, Vibhuti Yoga, it can be traced back to have risen from some dozen different verses in different earlier chapters. Of them, the most predominant and striking source is the verse number 6 in chapter 7, where Lord Krishna is describing the higher and the lower nature of the eternal Lord. And he says, I am the origin and the dissolution of the whole universe. And he added that beyond me, there is nothing. All this is strung on me as a row of jewels on a thread. This is from chapter 7, verse number 6 and 7. Although Lord Krishna as the self, eternal and the all-pervading, is the source of all names and forms, he has to indicate to Arjuna his exact place and worth among these things and beings in the universe. So this chapter is called a Vibhuti Yoga. It describes the power of God or the lordship of God and the pervasiveness of God. The self is the essence in the world of polarity is described in this chapter. That's why we see Lord Krishna indicating himself both as the most prominent and chief factor in all classes of beings and the supreme factor without which nothing can maintain itself. Nothing. We'll also notice as we dissect these verses one by one to discover their individual contents also. In this chapter, we discover that Arjun feels extremely inspired when he gets re-educated by his knowledge of the Vedas. And the teacher confesses that he himself feels encouraged by Arjun's happiness. Arjun inquires of Krishna as to how one can constantly keep in touch with the pluralistic world and live in it. That is a shlok number 17 of this chapter. And to answer this particular question, the rest of the chapter is packed with the indication of the infinite among the finite objects. And this chapter concludes that of what avail is it to you to know all these diversities? I exist supporting the entire by a portion of myself. Because Arjun wanted to know the detail, he says, what is the use of all the detail? Self seemingly conditioned by or functioning through the individual mind and intellect is the jiva, or the ego. There is its own imperfection in there. But the same eternal self conditioned by or functioning through the total mind and intellect is the God principle, the Ishwar. These are the two terms, Jeev and the Ishwar. Ishwar is unlimited, Jeev is limited. Ishwar is ever a master of its own perfections. If once this idea of the self as seen through an individual mind and the cosmic mind is understood properly, both these chapters, this chapter and the next chapter, so chapter 10 and chapter 11 become self-evident and self-explanatory also. It is very well known, and it's also a matter of common experience, that our world ever gets colored by the condition of our own minds. When we are happy, the world to us is a dancing hall of light and laughter and happiness. And the same world becomes a miserable dungeon of agony and tears when our mental condition changes. It is also noticeable that in each one of us, our world becomes completely and totally extinct when we are in the state of deep sleep. That means that whenever in each one of us, our mind intellect equipment does not function, that is called a deep sleep. It can be said very clearly, and we hear it also, people saying it, as the mind, so the world. And where there's no mind, there's no world for that individual. So we can draw from this that I create my world with my mind, and you create your world with your mind, and he creates his world with his mind. Even the world is the same, but with our own color of our mind, we perceive it. Into the pool of my world, certain aspects and portions of the world of others come to overlap because we are social beings. They overlap for varying periods of time. So philosophically, we can say that the total world of forms and names is created, sustained, and destroyed by the number of minds totally available to cognize and experience in the whole universe. That this total mind includes in itself even the rudimentary perceptions of a mind in the planet kingdom also, So when we look at the total mind, the minds, animals have the mind too. And the plant kingdom has the mind too. And also the well-developed mind of a human being, of course. That is a total mind. This implication of this theory is vast. It not only proves and explains the omnisciency and the omnipotency of God, but also it lends a comprehensible import to the term we generally describe for God, Sarvalok Maheshwaram, the Lord of the universe. While listening to this discourse, Arjun seems to have lost himself. That's what we see in this chapter. That experience of his, is not just only a transcendental, this is even beyond that. So this prepared Arjuna, provided a necessary mental elevation in cosmic self. This kind of expansion is needed. That's how we acquire that special power of cognition to experience the concept of a cosmic man, which is described in the next chapter, Vishwarup Darshan. It would never have been possible for Arjun to reach there without this. So that's why this chapter is so important. And I'm going to start this with the very first verse where Lord Krishna says, again, O mighty armed, listen to my supreme word. Remember, Lord Krishna over here is not just a person talking. He is connected with that Brahma, the highest. So when he says I, he is saying that I from that aspect. Remember that. So he says, O mighty armed, listen to my supreme word, which I, wishing your welfare, will declare to you who are delighted to hear me. No teacher can feel sufficiently inspired to continue his discourses unless the student shows the enthusiasm with the interested listening. That's very important. And Lord Krishna saw Arjun was listening and he was happy also. That's why he said, you are delighted to hear me, so I'm going to tell you more. And in the next verse, he says, neither the hosts of heavens nor the great rishis know my origin. In every way, I am the source of all the devatas and the rishis. The source. So whenever we cannot gather a knowledge from direct experience, our next best source of information is to gather it from those who are supposed to know about that special matter. So even in this indirect method of self-education is not available in Brahm Vidya. That's why he says, neither the host of heaven nor the great seers know my origin. In the Vedas, in the Upanishads also, there are 7 great rishis, which is called the Saptarishi. So there are different groups in different Vedas. We see some names overlapping, some different names too. But in general, it's a Bhrigu, Nab, Vivaswan, Sudama, Viraj. So these are the names, Marichi, Vashishta, Atri, Kashyap. These are some of the names you are familiar with. These rishis are not to be considered as men of knowledge and experience, but they are objectified representations of this subjective facts in the Vedas. Remember that. When the infinite comes to be seemingly identified with the total intellect or cosmic intellect and develops an egocentric personality of its own ahankar, it projects itself out for its own joy. That's how ahankar came, then the tanmatras came, then all these elements came. So this is how from the origin, from the unmanifest, we see the manifest. So in short, the consciousness being the very subjective truth in us can never become an object of perception for the sense organs or an object of feeling for the mind or an object of the knowing for the intellect. This secret truth is discussed in the Upanishads. And that's in a very condensed form, Lord Krishna has put it into this verse over here. But then the question comes into mind that nobody can come to know and realize the self, which is the origin of our physical, mental, and intellectual life. Fear comes into mind, and he must have seen that in Arjun's eyes. So to dispel this fear, he said, he who among the mortals knows me as unborn and beginningless, as the great Lord of the worlds, he is undeluded and is liberated from all sins. Sarvalok Maheshwaram. So it's possible to know him. But we have to do our homework though. So my lok is the field of experiences that I revel in at the levels of my body, mind, and intellect. That's a lok. And there is a word from all sins. In Hinduism, the concept of sin is not a frightening picture of some horrid inevitability. Man is not punished for his sins, but he is punished by his sins. That is the philosophy, Hindu philosophy. And how the self is the Lord of the world? He gives us a list over here. He says intellect, wisdom, non-illusion, forgiveness, truth, self-restraint, calmness, happiness, pain, birth and death, fear and also fearlessness. Non-injury, this is verse number 5, equanimity, contentment, austerity, charity, fame, ill fame, all these different kinds of qualities of beings arise from me alone. Continuing the general idea that the Lord is the material cause as well as the efficient cause for the world of polarity within and without an individual. Okay. So material as well as efficient. Krishna is enumerating the various qualities expressed by the mind and the intellect of a man. That's what he's doing in these verse number 4 and 5. Because wisdom, forgiveness, equanimity, non-injury, all that is the qualities that arise from the mind and the intellect. You are familiar with most of these terms. He talks about the sham and then the dham. Sham is the faculty of controlling internally the mental thoughts. Sham, controlling your mind. And dham is controlling your senses. We need the strength to control our senses also. If we cannot control our senses, how can we control our mind? But they both need to be controlled. These qualities, what he has mentioned in these verses, almost indicate a complete classification of the entire world of beings and their fields of experiences. So these two verses, 4 and 5, are an exhaustive commentary upon the Lord's status of the Lord of world, Sarvalok Maheshwaram. Then he talks about the 7 great rishis in the next verse. He says the 7 great rishis, the ancient 4, and also the Manus, possessed of powers like me, were born of my mind. From them are these creatures in the world originated and sustained. So 7 great rishis, philosophically, we got to understand they are nothing but our intellect, ego, and the 5 sense stimuli. Power to see, power to hear, power to smell, power to taste, and power to touch. And the intellect and the ego. These are 7. These items in the microcosm are expanded to the macrocosm in its fullness as the total intellect, which is called Mahat, and the Ahankar. The great elements called the elemental qualities, Tanmatras, the sound, the touch, the form, the taste, and the smell. We should understand these. The bundle of thoughts which flow consistently, they function as the mind, intellect, ego. These are the ancient 4. He says 7 great rishis and the ancient 4. Ancient 4 are these: mind, intellect, ego, and chitta. These are eternal voice of wisdom. Brahma's Kumars, because they are born out of the mind of the Creator at the very beginning of his creative activities. In Puranas, they have given the names Sanat, Sanak, Sanatan, and Sanandan. These 4 names, these are the 4 Kumars. And then he talked about the Manus. Manus formulated the laws of being. As a member of the family, a member of the community, of the nation, and the world. Why should a person understand these implications of creation from the standpoint of individual and cosmic minds? Answer to that is in the next verse, verse number 7. He who in truth knows these manifold manifestations of my being, that means the macrocosm, and this yoga power of mine becomes established in the tremorless yoga. There is no doubt about it. So that's why this knowledge is so important. The seeker must know it in reality. The Sanskrit word to know in reality is tattvata. That means a person has to realize it in a subjective experience and got to live intuitively. So this is not only some of the words we have to just memorize. This is not something we got to read and just put it away. Ultimately, we got to live according to this. That's why he used the word tremorless yoga. Oh, vikampen yogen yujyate na atra sanshaya. A permanent and steady establishment in the experience of the self is assured. Never forgetting that I am not the body. I have the body, I need to take care of the body. I have the mind, I need to keep it peaceful, clean, but I am the Atma, the soul, the self. Never forgetting that. And what exactly is the technique by which we can get ourselves established steadily and permanently in the unbroken experience of the infinite as our own real nature? What is the technique? Lord Krishna says in verse number 8, I am the source of all. From me, everything evolves. Understanding this, the wise, endowed with loving consciousness, worships me. Worships means loves me. Love of devotion is measured by the capacity of the lover to identify himself with the beloved. There's no difference between me and my beloved God. Then I got to have those qualities too. I got to have those qualities in my body, those qualities in my mind also, in my senses also, in my intellect also. That's how you try to become, move towards the perfection as you go about it. Let me read it again. Love of devotion. So that's a bhakti. If you really think that we are a bhagat, then love of devotion is measured by the capacity of the lover to identify himself with the beloved. To become more and more God-like. Act like him, think like him. What does God do? God loves all. Number 9, with your minds wholly resting in me. Again, he is giving the technique. With their minds wholly resting in me, with their senses absorbed in me, enlightening each other, and ever speaking of me, they are satisfied and delighted. We cannot do it 24/7, but at least internally we can remember God. Externally, whenever we get a chance, be like God. Nityam tushyanti cha ramanti cha. That means discussing with one another the things about God. There are 2 words in here. In this verse, there is a Krida and a Raman. Krida is a pleasure that is derived as a result of our contact with something other than us. Krida. Like whenever we play, little kids, they play with a ball. That is a Krida. Driving the pleasure with something other than you. And then Raman is when they are fantasizing in their own mind that my friend is here. They talk about it. They visualize the friend is there. So with the Raman, there's a pleasure derived within ourselves. So for a Bhagat also, sometimes we use the temple, sometimes we use the diya, sometimes we go to the holy places, or sometimes we just help others outside of ourselves. But then there are times when we sit and just think that God is within me, enjoying the presence of God inside us. So both ways, sometimes going out of yourself to feel the pleasure of God, even going for a walk and thinking that God is with me, walking with me, God is in the trees also, in the flowers also, in the clouds also. Then sitting and meditating and thinking God is inside me. In our dreams, in our imaginations, in our plannings, in our remembrances, feeling that God is with me. Having reached the state of progress in their march From where do the seekers gain their guidance and strength to fulfill their pilgrimage? He says in verse number 10, to them, if a devotee has reached to this level, to them, ever steadfast worshipping me with love, I give a Buddhi Yog, by which they come to me. Buddhi is the intellect. So not only the mind, even subtler than the mind is our Buddhi. Buddhi Yog is the right knowledge gained through meditation upon the infinite nature of the self. That is a Buddhi Yog. An intellectual contact or comprehension of the reality is a Buddhi Yog. So he says, I give it to you. I make your intellect also united with me. The power of an intuitive awareness of the reality comes only to such seekers in whom the maturity of a steady and continued contemplation upon the self has come about. Because what has happened, by controlling the senses, controlling the mind, loving God, agitations have dropped away. And in Sanskrit, agitations are the vikshep. And now with the Buddhi Yoga, the avarna, the veiling between me and the reality has dropped down too. This is, Buddhi Yoga is also like a samadhi. Samadhi. Okay? Siddhi. There's a samata in the dhi. Dhi is the Buddhi. There is no churning in there anymore. Okay, samta, equanimity. So the Buddhi Yoga, what exactly does the Lord provide for the seeker? Why do we need a Buddhi Yoga? Beautiful verse, number 11. Out of mere compassion for them, I, dwelling within their heart, destroy darkness born of ignorance by the luminous lamp of knowledge. This is what happens. Agyanam tamha nashyami. The whole story started with the agyan, the ignorance. He says with this Buddhi Yoga that ignorance has been destroyed. And Jnana Deep ne bhaswata. So luminous lamp of knowledge is ignited there. So that's why I said it amounts to the samadhi experience. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Dharana, dhyan, and samadhi. So after meditation, we got to reach the samadhi state. This Buddhi Yoga is that. Having heard both the Vibhuti and the Yoga described so elaborately in these verses, Arjun is asking a question. Arjun says, you are Supreme Brahma, the Supreme Abode, the Supreme Purifier, Eternal Divine Purusha, the God of all the gods, unborn, omnipresent. All the rishis have thus declared you. And also the Dev Rishi Narad, so also Asit, Deval, Vyasa. And now the same you yourself saying to me. He's mentioning all these great rishis over here because they have all declared that God is that. So he says, I do believe in what you are saying. He says, I believe, this is verse number 14, I believe all this that you say to me as true, O Keshav. Verily, neither the Devas nor the Danvas know your identity. You yourself know yourself by yourself. Supreme Purusha, that's a Purushottam, O source of beings, O Lord of beings, O God of gods, O rulers of the world. You should indeed, without reserve, tell me of your divine glories. This is what he's asking. By which you exist, pervading all these words. How shall I ever meditating know you, O yogi? So he knows that I need to meditate, I need to concentrate, but he says, how? See, just like we ask our teacher, how to meditate, tell us. In what aspects or forms, O blessed Lord, are you to be thought of by me? He says, tell me again in detail, O Janardhan, of your yoga power and your glory. I do not feel satisfied by hearing your life-giving and so nectar-like speech. So in these verses, Arjuna is showing this deep interest. He wants to know in detail. Devas means the nobler and the higher comprehensions in us. The positive qualities, the good qualities are called devas, and danavas are the hosts of the negative urges in us. We are a combination of both. So he says, how can I understand you? What exactly is the special quality that enables us to understand this? He is showing in these words a lot of reverence and devotion. But he is also expressing directly his intellectual demand to the Lord. And he is almost demanding an exhaustive discourse of his cosmic form, cosmic glory. And Arjuna, being a man of action, supremely practical-minded, wanted to gather sufficient data for his intellect to ponder over, classify, and understand it. But then, was it just an intellectual curiosity in Arjuna that made him ask these questions? No, he knew the goal is different. It's not only the knowledge. That's why he said, I want to meditate. Tell me which form I should meditate upon. Because Supreme cannot become an object of any intellectual comprehension. That's why he said, how am I to meditate so that I may come to know you? He wants to know God, wants to realize God, he wants to enter into God. The goal of a seeker is to know the truth. We should have that also. In our own personal experience, while in an intimate identification with it. That is our goal. So he is explaining precisely what he wants. He making it very clear that even if the answer is rather lengthy, he will not feel tired of listening to and understanding them all. That's why in verse number 18, he says, tell me again in detail, because Lord Krishna, sometimes teacher has already explained, but student did not absorb it yet. So that's why he says, tell me in detail again, O Janardhan, of your yoga power and your glory. I do not feel satisfied by hearing your life-giving and so nectar-like speech. Someone we love, someone we are enamored of, we want them to just keep on talking to us. And we say we never can have enough of your speech. And this is what Arjuna is saying. So, Yog and Vibhuti. So next week, we will start with verse number 19. So let's stop it here with Arjuna's question. And then we'll see verse number 19 starts with Lord Krishna's answer. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much.